Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joe Davidge, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual author events. If you would like to find out more about the Georgia Center for the Book and our author events, you can go to georgiacenterforthebook.org and see our full listing of events and sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. If you are watching the video while it is recorded on YouTube, we would like to ask you to like and subscribe to that video as well. That way you will be most up to date on the videos once we post them to our YouTube channel. We have several events coming up this week that we'd like to draw your attention to. As we have been, we are hosting gallery hours for the Book is Art Volume 9 Muse. You can find the links on Eventbrite to sign up for tickets for those viewing days every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. We also would like to invite you to attend an artist talk tomorrow, September 9th. It features artists Thomas Camp, Stephen Diver, and Jillian Seco, who will be talking about their works that are on display here at the Decatur Library as part of the Book is Art Volume 9 Muse exhibition. If you sign up for our weekly newsletter, and we hope that you do, you'll find out about many of the events we have coming up this fall, including our Voices Carry Poetry Atlanta reading, an event that we have hosted at First Baptist Church with Rick Bragg, our highly anticipated fall book preview that's a little later in fall this year, but it will be nonetheless informative. And also we will once again continue in a series with Maren McKenna, our favorite journalist and writer of all things about public health, for her series that she is coordinating with the Center for the Study of Human Health at Emory. Those are 3 wonderful programs, and we hope you will join us for as many as you can. If you would like to ask a question this evening after our formal presentation, feel free to use the Q&A feature. You will find that button at the top or the bottom of the screen, depending on your device. We also have enabled live transcription for those of you that need that particular assistance for hearing impairment. You can find the CC button at the top or the bottom of your screen, and by clicking on it, you can enlarge the font to make it as big or as small as you require. We are so pleased this evening to welcome Dr. Tracy Swinton Bailey to have this discussion that is truly at the very heart of public libraries and at the heart of our communities. Part memoir and part call to action, Forever Free is an intimate look at America's long-standing struggle to adequately educate vulnerable children, and it offers valuable insights for affecting change in families and communities nationwide. At the root of every important problem we face, from mass incarceration to income inequality, is an education system influenced by our nation's fraught history. With the gap between white academic achievement and that of our students of color widening, now is the time to turn our attention to the basics. And few would argue with the fact that the single most essential aspect of a good education is literacy. Beyond reading and writing, literacy encompasses a whole host of skills that allow us to develop our potential and succeed in society, including critical thinking, self-discipline, curiosity, leadership, and motivation. Helping all our nation's young people, especially those who live in low-income communities, improve their literacy skills should be our top priority. In Forever Free, Tracy Swinton Bailey charts the journey of one such program, her nonprofit, Freedom Readers. From a childhood shaped by books to a career promoting the love of reading, she describes the hurdles and the rewards of academia, teaching, mobilizing, and fundraising. Bailey outlines clearly and persuasively how Freedom Readers' one-to-one tutoring model has worked across the rural South and how it can work across the United States. This book will inspire and empower readers and should be placed in the hands of educators and organizers at every level. Tracy Swinton Bailey earned a doctorate degree in education with a specialization in language and literacy at the University of South Carolina in 2013. She began her career as a high school English instructor and went on to found Freedom Readers, an after-school and summer literacy program that was designed and implemented to support families in low-income areas and assist children in achieving their academic goals in reading. She is also married to an award-winning author and is the mother of 2 children. And we are so pleased to have her here tonight to discuss her book, Forever Free. So will you please join me to welcome Dr. Tracy Swinton Bailey. Tracy?
Joe, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And as you were talking, I felt like I needed to pull out my calendar so that I could attend some of those wonderful events that you were talking about. It just sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight to talk a little bit about my book. I'd like to read to you from the first chapter. As Joe said earlier, my book is a memoir and a call to action. And I'd like to read to you from a part of the book that is more memoir than call to action. It really talks a bit about the intention that we have when we step forward to help anyone, especially when we step forward to help young people who live in low-income communities achieve their dreams through building their literacy skills. This is page 10 of Forever Free. I grew up in North Santee, a small community in South Carolina that sits next to the Santee River and straddles Georgetown and Charleston counties. Our churches rested at the center of the community, with Singleton AME on Highway 17 and Mount Zion AME on Powell Road. By the time I was born, 4 generations of my family had been a part of Mount Zion. The preachers were like family, and just about every adult I knew consistently volunteered there to keep it running smoothly. They were stewards and trustees and secretaries and sextons and class leaders. Every person in that church knew my family. We were close-knit. When I was a child, we were taught that we were the legacy of Richard Allen, who started the African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1816, so that Blacks could worship without the threat of racial discrimination and oppression, in a place where people who look like us could begin to understand our intrinsic worth and God-given rights. We celebrated the ideals of our founder, who hid escaped slaves in the basement of his church and established Sabbath schools to teach literacy and elevate the status of the Black community nationwide. It is the Black church, with its deep roots in dignity, resistance, uplift, and solidarity, that would give rise to the likes of Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr., that has shaped me. This is where my parents walked out an intrinsic compulsion to care for their community, and why they thought it was so important for me to do the same. It is within these sacred walls that I first encountered the idea of charity, depicted in scripture as the highest form of love, the unselfish love of one's fellow man, the foundation and root of all other virtues. My ability to articulate my understanding of charity came into focus by degrees rather than in a blinding flash of revelation. This ideology began to crystallize for me when I was a 37-year-old graduate student driving back and forth from my home in Myrtle Beach to the campus of the University of South Carolina in Columbia. I listened to books on the drive to keep my mind occupied, and one sparked a deep internal debate. Tracy Kidder's Mountains Beyond Mountains, The Quest of Paul Farmer, a Man Who Could Cure the World, prompted questions with which I would grapple for years. What is the true meaning of charity? Is charity always beneficial? Or can the purity of charity be co-opted by those who would do harm to the poor? I've come to understand that there is a strong distinction between what we have referred to as charity in America and what I've come to call radical care. Brian Stevenson, a social justice activist and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, puts it this way: we are all broken by something. We have all hurt someone and have been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. Radical care can only manifest when our desire to extend charity rises out of our unique brokenness instead of our guilt or our superiority. When we embrace radical care, we increase our capacity for compassion and our inner strength shines through. In addition to getting a firm grasp on concepts like charity, my reading journey has led to a struggle to understand issues of race, class, gender, and privilege. When encountering biblical passages that direct believers to be kind to the poor and needy, I have wondered who exactly well-intentioned Americans propose to help when they read about these poor. It's more than just theory to me, it's personal. In the minds of some, my identity as a Black woman who grew up in the rural South automatically makes me a part of the group that needs to be helped. After all, when we think of riding in on a white horse and playing the role of savior, we don't see the individual faces or hear the specific names or consider the unique stories of those we are helping. Often, our imaginations are guided by what the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has termed the single story, a prevailing narrative about a group or culture or country that ignores the complexity of the individual. My very existence and the work to which I have been dedicated obfuscate the image of what helpers should look like. My father walked away from formal schooling at the end of the 8th grade because there was no bus to take Black children into town to attend school. And my mother took a break from school after giving birth for the first time at age 14. I'm the youngest of 7 siblings who grew up on dirt roads and have received some financial assistance from the government, even though both my parents worked. I qualified for free lunch from kindergarten through 12th grade. I am the poor that many privileged people call to mind when they try to imagine ways that they can atone for the sins of their slaveholding ancestors. I'm the product of women who scrubbed toilets and rocked white women's babies and had to catch rides on rickety buses to make less than $2 a week. By all accounts, I should be the one needing the help. In contrast to how they saw me though, I never used the word poor to describe myself or my family members when I was growing up. I was aware that there were people who lived a tougher life than ours. Some didn't have indoor plumbing, while I never knew a time when we didn't. And I'll never forget the day we were able to trade in our box fans for central air conditioning. We were still poor by some standards, but we were not so different from everyone around us, proud, not looking for handouts, and unwilling to accept anyone's charity. I came from a home where education, hard work, and integrity were valued. I played jacks and marbles with my cousins on dirt roads and sang in choirs and went on church-sponsored trips. We were simply human and experienced a full range of human emotions. And I'll stop the reading there because I think that's just really a good point to stop and consider the fact that literacy and reading and being able to encounter books and comprehend stories just makes us more human, just makes us able to better connect with each other and with ourselves. And so my life mission has been to bring this power of words and communication to all of our children so that none of them miss out. For us, it's not just about decoding words on a page, but it's really about making a connection to the emotions that drive us, to the experiences that bring us together. And so I hope that all of you listening tonight will grab a copy of the book, but will also just reach out to a child that's in your sphere of influence and make sure that everyone has access to this powerful gift. Joe?
Thank you so much, Tracy, for that. And that was an absolutely beautiful section. And you know, although it was very, very heartfelt, those images just conjured up so many things about the South and the Southern experience. And and definitely will lead to some great questions. So if you all do have any questions, don't forget to put them in the Q&A section. And also a reminder that if you do want to purchase a copy of the book, the link has been provided in the chat section. Our bookseller tonight is Brave and Kind Bookshop here in Decatur, Georgia. They are Black owned and mom operated. So we approve of that most highly on absolutely every level. They are a great partner for our events. And no matter where you are, we encourage you to support all of your independent bookstores. They have done so much for our communities, and they continue to be wonderful, wonderful spaces and resources for us all. If you don't have a very good public library, but so we do need to put in a plug for the public libraries as well.
Right.
So, Tracy, I wonder, you talk a lot about your childhood and influences and things like that. Do you have a particular book that you remember from your childhood, or maybe going into your young adulthood, that was particularly memorable for you for any kind of reason, or maybe it just the light went on for you, and that you still recommend it or have it on a shelf somewhere?
Well, Joe, I'm glad you asked that question. I write about this in the book quite a bit because I remember being surrounded by books when I was a child. And I had no concept of where these books came from, but they were just there. And I remember reading a lot of Dr. Seuss when I was growing up. I read a lot of Berenstain Bears when I was growing up. And there was this one particular book, it was a Sesame Street book. And it starred the furry monster Grover. And it was either called Please Don't Turn the Page, or There's a Monster at the End of This Book. Do you know that book, Joe?
It is, and it is there's a monster at the end of the book. And he continues to tell people not to turn the page because they'll get to that monster. Yes, I know exactly.
So that book was one of my favorites. I mean, my dad used to read to me before I went to sleep at night. So I can really remember brushing my teeth, putting on my pajamas or my nightgown, getting under the covers, and he would sit next to the bed and read to me. But whenever he read that particular book, I always begged him to read it again. Because when you find out at the end of this book that the monster that we were afraid of is the actual monster that was narrating the whole book. I mean, I can remember cracking up as like a 5 or 6-year-old. I could not get enough of this book. So he would say, no, I'm tired. I can't read it to you again. So I would take it and go under the covers and put it next to my Donald Duck nightlight and just look at the pictures over and over again. Now, it really amazed me that as an adult, I was listening to an interview with Jimmy Fallon, the host of The Tonight Show. And he said that that was his favorite book too. I was like, I thought I was the only one in love with this book. So as a little child, I remember loving that book. And then as I got older and my teachers would give me this reading list for the summer, one summer I came across Native Son by Richard Wright. And that book just completely changed the game for me. I mean, for the first time, I felt like an author just had me in the palm of his hands. And I could see those images. It unfolded in my mind like a movie. So as a really young child, maybe before I even went to school, I'd have to choose that Sesame Street book. But later on in my development, when I was in high school, when I read Native Son, those two books really had a big impact on me.
I can understand that. One of my great memories growing up is that, and I don't know if they still do them nowadays, but we had the subscriptions to the monthly books that would come. So there was the Dr. Seuss that was in the red plastic holder on the one side with the cat in the hat.
Yes.
And then on the other side was the Sweet Pickles Bus. It was, I think it was like a pinkish or it was maybe a green color. I forget what it was, but yeah, that was very big every month. When the books came in that cardboard wrapper in the mail to the house, and then my sister and I would fight over who got to read them first. And whose room the little bookshelves got to live in. But
So you said the word subscription, and it reminded me of something that I just really feel like I need to tell you this.
mhm.
So I said in my reading that I'm the youngest of 7 children, but I didn't say that there are 9 years between myself and my other 6 siblings. And so I have a sister who's 12 years older than I am, who was an avid reader, and she had books everywhere. And she just reminded me yesterday, actually, when we were at the Labor Day cookout at her house, that she bought for me when I was in elementary school a weekly reader subscription so that I could get those in the mail. And it just, I was like, yeah, I did get a weekly reader subscription. All these little pieces come together and kind of shape an entire reading life. So that's an important aspect, I think.
Yeah, and First Foundation still does something like that with first books. But it's like, yeah, there was a little bit of anticipation too.
Yeah.
When you knew it was time to get these new books, and that didn't stop us from going to the library and things like that. But just having the luxury of having the books come to your house.
Yeah.
Also, it was a great thing. But I'm glad you told the story about your father, and you just mentioned your sister, because especially in public libraries, we talk a lot, and we love to use the phrase, that parents who read create children who read. And there's studies about modeling and letting your children see you read the newspaper, or letting your children see you read books while you're at home. And as newspapers have sort of gone the way of the wayside, it's like I remember my parents having newspapers open at the morning table and things like that. And that's a very powerful image. How important is that kind of modeling, do you think, into helping build literacy?
Oh, I think that modeling is it's everything. It is so extremely important. My dad wasn't a big newspaper reader, but he was a big magazine and catalog reader. And very often I would see him reading his Bible or his Sunday school lesson. He would every Saturday evening take out that Sunday school lesson and read it and underline things and make notes. And I think that all of those things were extremely important. When I was in one of my classes in graduate school, I had an assignment to find out about my reading history or my family's reading history. And he allowed me to videotape an interview with him. And that's when I discovered that it was his mom that taught him to read. So he was born in 1935. So he grew up in, the Great Depression era. I just never had any clue that there was that much reading going on in the homes of these families, because I know that they struggled mightily with finances. She was a single mom. And he said to me that she sat him down and his 3 brothers and sisters, and they would read from Dick and Jane. And she would sit with them and she would correct them when they didn't say the words correctly. And that was how he learned to read. And when he went on to first grade, because they didn't have kindergarten in place at that time, he already knew how to read. And it absolutely blew my mind. So I said to him, I guess that's why it was so important for you to teach me how to read. And he just laughed. So there's studies that really show that it's important to have books in the home. And, that's why at Freedom Readers, we give away so many books, because we're trying to build home libraries. And the studies show that kids are more likely to practice reading at home when they have those books there, and when they have people around them who are doing the same thing and will read with them. So I can't emphasize and underscore what you said enough. Those models are so extremely important.
Yeah, our Library Foundation, who is our sponsor here at the public library, we participate in a program called 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten. And we're very, very active in it. It's a statewide program in Georgia. But we were one of the first library systems to sign on board. And we have these wonderful little tote bags that we give families when they sign up. And I know the foundation director we're very, very cognizant when we make these bags when folks sign up. We have some board books for the very, very little ones, and some picture books, and then some chapter books for even some older readers who sign up, because, reading levels vary. And I read very early as well. I came from a reading family, and I was reading well before I went to kindergarten. There's a great photo that I try to steal every year when I go home of my sister and I are sitting on the couch, and I have a newspaper open, and I'm reading to her, and everybody thinks it's so cute. And they're like, oh, it looks like he's reading to her. And my mother would love to say, he actually is reading to her. He may have not known every word or the meaning of every word, but he was able to sound it out, and, was a very, very early reader in that. But, it's so important. And especially we have so many people who sign up for that 1,000 books before kindergarten, because it's just such a vital program. And working in a public library, even today, you see the parents and the families and the kids coming with the stacks of books, either back, and they take them to the return, and they take another stack out the door. But it is, and public libraries are such a great equalizer too, for people who can't, purchase the books themselves, don't have that kind of luxury, you don't have, the means for whatever reason. And, it does come down to an ever widening income gap too, that we have here for folks, and how that creates a disparity as well. Even here at the library, we during the summer, we don't do fines for children's library cards, because it's like summer reading, and hey, if anybody is going to forget a book by a pool, or forget what date to turn it in, it very possibly could be one of our younger patrons, and to try and not discourage, kids from checking books out or feeling bad because they've accrued a fine. Our library system did away with that for kids for the summer.
That's awesome.
It really is. And it does really alleviate sort of like a large gap to that you don't need to feel bad because you can't pay a fine. And I don't think that those people realize is that how economics really affect education and attainment in these situations.
Well, Joe, you talk about the taking away of the fines and that being a really great equalizer. I mean, the library is just an equalizer anyway. But I grew up in this community that was like maybe, it took about 30 minutes on the school bus to get to school from my house. So we lived in a rural, community that was far away from the town, and the town was where the library was. But in the summertime, the bookmobile would come. And so we could get on the bookmobile and choose books. And it was the most amazing. It was better than the ice cream truck in my neighborhood, I promise you. We would run and scream and go on there and get books and read them and wait for the next time it would come. And that was also an important part of my development, being able to check out those books from the bookmobile.
Speaking of great stories, before we started the event, you were talking about a great story as well of encouraging your children to read. For at least 15 minutes when they got home from school. Why don't you tell us that story?
I'd love to. So I have two children. My son has just started his second year in college, and my daughter is a senior in high school. But when they were younger, I had the luxury to be able to pick them up from school every day. And I got to be able to hear the first comments that they had at the end of every school day, their first impressions. And so I would be in the car, writer's line, doing my homework or working on something, and then I'd pick them up and bring them home. And the first thing we would do every day when we got home is I would set the alarm on the microwave oven for about 20 minutes, and we would all sit with a book and read, all three of us. So every single day when we would pull into the garage, I would say to my two kids, okay, we're about to go inside and read. And every single day, my daughter, when she was in elementary school, she's 17 years old now, but when she was about 7, she would say, read again. We just did that yesterday. So sometimes she would come in and she would get her book and settle herself behind the couch, and I'd see her nodding off. But some days she'd really have a book that she'd really, really enjoy. So now that she's 17 and she's taking the SAT, she looks at that score in reading and she's pretty pleased with it. And whenever I walk by her and I hear her talking about the SAT, I say to her, "You're welcome." And that's all. I just leave her with that.
Oh, that's great. That's a wonderful, wonderful story too. Well, not to take away from the sort of like great reminiscences and stories, but you do mention a figure too, and it's that 2/3 of kids who are not reading on grade level by the end of the 3rd grade are going to wind up behind bars or on welfare.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very sobering statistic. What does that really mean for us? I mean, we look at that and we can be shocked about it, but how can other than giving to organizations like Freedom Readers and going and patronizing public libraries, how can we try and combat that in some ways, or even using the means that we personally have to try and affect some kind of change and reverse that number.
You're right, Joe, when you say that figure is very shocking. But a lot of researchers point to the fact that 3rd grade is a pivotal year for many young children, because up to that point, you are learning to read. But beyond 3rd grade, you're expected to be able to read to learn. So you're no longer focusing on the decoding, on the sounds, but teachers are expecting you to be able to pick up a book and figure out what this means and how this applies to the bigger picture and make connections with your reading and all of that. And so when that doesn't happen, then children often find themselves falling behind and struggling to keep up, and teachers are often trying to figure out ways to help them catch up. And in a lot of instances, it just does not happen. And as the years progress and this feeling of hopelessness kind of compounds, then that's when we see a lot of children or a lot of young people in high school start to consider checking out and start to believe that there's something wrong with them and that they're never going to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish with reading. So what I like to encourage everyone to do is to understand that the job of helping kids enjoy reading, understand that reading is a thing that feeds your curiosity, that reading is something that can help you travel around the world, that it's a stress reliever. The job of giving kids all of those wonderful gifts of books can't just belong in the school. It can't just fall on the teacher. It has to fall on our entire community. So we need our houses of worship. We need our community centers. We need our civic organizations. We need everyone to stop and kind of take a look at this and say, if we don't invest in our children when they're small, then when they're older, we're going to have to invest in our prisons, and we're going to have to invest in another way. So there's an old saying that goes, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So what we have to do is grab a whole bunch of these books that really pique our curiosity, books that mean something to an individual child, and get those books into their hands and share them in a way that really sparks that fire within them to want to read more and more and more. That's what we have to do.
Excellent. Well, speaking of, being the fire to spark this love of reading in children, we do have some questions about your Freedom Readers program.
Wonderful.
Suzanne wanting to know, what's it about? Is it only in South Carolina? So tell us all about it, because it is more than just reading literacy. It encompasses all kinds of literacy. So why don't you go about that?
Okay, Suzanne, thanks for that question. That is a wonderful question. Freedom Readers started in 2010, right around the time that I had just started to work on my graduate degree and received an invitation to go into a public housing community. And I grabbed a whole bunch of friends and a whole bunch of books that I had at my house and kind of just put together this model. It is a weekly 90-minute meeting. We invite 20 young people to be a part of each, we call them sites. And when a child signs up, then whenever they're with us, we refer to them as scholars because we want them to take on that identity. We will put together about an 8 to 10 week session, and we will run 3 sessions a year, a spring, a summer, and a fall session. And each session will have a theme. We just got through with our summer session and the theme was, how does your garden grow? So we would choose books that are related to that theme. We might find a video that's related to that theme. And we always find a theme song that's related to the theme so that we can help kids make a connection between the sound of those words and what they look like on the page. So after we go through the theme song and we talk about the theme a little bit, then 45 minutes of that weekly meeting is set aside for a scholar and a tutor to spend time together. The first thing that happens is the scholar is asked to read to the tutor from something that they can handle on their own, their independent reading level. So even if it's a 5-year-old, they can walk you through the book and just become familiar and comfortable with the fact that books have covers and we read from left to right and we read from front to back. And so they are picking up these conventions. But older children are able to practice what they've learned in school about reading. And then we ask the tutor to read to the scholar about something that might be interesting to them, but might be a little bit above their reading level. And then we ask the tutor and the scholar to prepare to make a speech. We'll give them an outline. We'll teach them about voice projection and eye contact and speaking with enthusiasm. And then at the end of the meeting, we put aside 15 minutes for the scholars to stand in front of a room. Sometimes there are 40 people and just make a speech based on the template that we've given them. And so in the beginning of that 8 to 10 week session, we see a lot of the kids that are very shy and they say, no, we can't do this. But by the end of that 10-week session, we really have to make a list of who gets to go first because all of the kids want to go first. When the speeches are over, the kids are walking out of the door. They stop by the take-home book table. They pick up a brand new book for their home library, and then they come back to see us the next week. And we've had tutors and scholars that have been paired together for years, and they just develop these great relationships so that the tutors understand exactly what's going to interest the scholar. They know a lot about their lived experience, and so they can just really personalize that approach that they're taking to helping that child learn to fall in love with books. So that's what Freedom Readers is about.
Excellent, thank you so very much. And don't forget, we do have a link over in the chat for freedomreaders.org, so you can find out more about that as well. Tracy, I want to just touch on maybe 1 or 2 more things before we wrap up this evening.
Okay.
And one of them, if you could maybe speak to it, we do a program with Dr. Pearl McCaney, who's formerly of Georgia State University, and she did a series for us on empathy in reading. And read like Jason Reynolds and like that. But it was, and her whole focus was about putting readers who do not live in, or maybe who do not understand certain situations, into that situation and building empathy through the reading of literature. Do you have anything to say about that? Or maybe talk to us a little bit more about reading, what we could be reading to maybe build our empathy about these communities that don't have the luxury of libraries or literacy like some communities do.
Mhm. So, Joe, when you were phrasing that question just now, there were a couple of words that jumped out at me.
Mhm.
The first word that jumped out at me was empathy, because I believe that reading is our number one tool for helping young people grow and develop their empathy. You can walk a mile in someone else's shoes when you're reading a story, and you can really see the problems that they encounter from so many different angles. And so you're able to empathize with them, but you're also building your critical thinking skills, and you're able to analyze things without even having to go through those problems or being in those situations. So I just love what you're talking about. I love that you mentioned Jason Reynolds, one of my very favorite authors. I mean, he really does some great work. And so just this whole idea of putting books in the hands of people who don't really necessarily understand that particular situation or that lived experience. I think that's the heart and soul of what it is that we do at Freedom Readers. So you mentioned Jason Reynolds, and I just happen to have a stack of books next to me right now. I want to show you this one that's by Jacqueline Woodson. And she and Jason Reynolds are kind of neck and neck right now for me in terms of the books that I love. And so this is a recent picture book that she put out. It's called The Day You Begin. And I love this story because it really gives a lot of different characters in this book an opportunity to talk about their own experiences, but it's like the first day of school. And it's the first time that they're all together there in the room. And it just really beautifully illustrates the connection that happens between people when we begin to tell our stories. That's one of my favorite books there. I do want to show you another book that I have here next to me. It's called I Am a Kindness Hero. And so this book talks about being kind and how you can really use your kindness powers for good to change your circumstances around you and your entire community. I love that one as well. And the last one I think I'll show you, I'm sorry, I just have books everywhere. I have to apologize.
I understand that.
Do you know this book?
Yes.
Oh, this book is so beautiful. It's called Silway by Lupita Nyong'o. And she tells the story of this little girl who's trying to come to terms with the way she sees herself and the way the world sees her. And so I think reading this book helped me deepen my empathy, and it helped me to really think through some of the stories that I even shared in Forever Free. So there are all kinds of great books out there that can really help us open the door onto somebody else's experience. There's this great researcher, and I can't think of her name right now, but she said, she wrote in her research that kids need two kinds of books. They need books that are windows and books that are mirrors. So you need books that give you a window onto someone else's experience so that you can see what's going on with them. But just as importantly, you need books that are mirrors, that mirror your experience so that you can understand that you're not alone, and that, you know, your experience is not just something that is just an anomaly, but you're a part of a bigger picture, and that you are beautiful and special and appreciated for whatever it is that you bring to the table. So thank you so much for that question. Tell me that person again that you were working with in Georgia that was doing that work. I need to write that down.
Ooh, I'm trying to remember which.
The
It was
professor.
Dr. Pearl McHaney. Yeah. Oh, we can
Yes.
connect you to. She did a great program. She actually was working, and I don't know because she finally retired after all of her wonderful years of work at Georgia State. She was really working on a program, and it's like, I may get this wrong. It was with the middle schools, and they were going to use the Jason Reynolds version of Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning.
Right.
In
How to
schools.
be an anti-racist or
anti-racist, yes, yeah. And they were going to do that, but and I also love that you mentioned both Jacqueline Woodson and Jason Reynolds, because they were both Jacqueline was our 6th National Ambassador for Children's Literature, and Jason Reynolds was, of course, our current National Ambassador for Children's Literature, and that's through the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
But we've had Jason Reynolds here at the building several times, and I remember when he was talking about getting his contract with Marvel to write the SpiderMan books, and he really kind of saw how far he could push it in telling them, he wanted Spider-Man to be a child of color, and he wanted them to live in a situation that wasn't ideal, and he wanted them to have to deal with family members who are incarcerated. And he said he was kind of shocked that Marvel let him go with that. But he gave us a Spider-Man that I think more people are endeared to than the Spider-Man we saw in the comics in the 50s and 60s. Peter Parker was cool, but I think our new Spider-Man is a little cooler. So, but it goes back to modeling, and you're seeing a young Black man as a superhero.
Yeah.
And how that can just be groundbreaking for a young child as well.
Joe, just to circle really quickly, if you'll allow me just 2 seconds here, to circle back really quickly to what we're saying about empathy. Like, I have had to take a Monday through Friday break from my social media, because I've just noticed that we all have seen it. Our country has just become so polarized, and we're just standing on opposite sides, in some cases, just shouting at one another, right? And so I really tend to believe in my heart that literacy and reading and books is our #1 tool for being able to heal that rift in our country, to being able to sit and absorb another person's story without necessarily being in a situation where you can shout back and forth at one another, but you can take a break, and just consider things and think about it and digest it and let it simmer, and then really find places between your story and theirs where we can connect, where we can care for one another across that rift. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do.
Well, and you clearly see that. So before getting to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask any questions, so do feel free to drop those in the Q&A and the chat as we wrap up this evening. But as I sit there and stare at the wonderful books I see on the shelf behind you, and I see Isabel Wilkerson's cast. Thank you for promoting Georgia authors. So what are you reading now? If you have any time for leisure reading, what's on your nightstand for reading?
Well, I'm actually about to dive into to Cast. I haven't started reading that one yet, but I did read her Warmth of Other Suns, and that book was amazing. It was just incredible. I stopped and asked myself, how am I learning so much about American history? And I feel like this is a novel. I feel like it's just unfolding in front of me, like it's so beautifully written. She does such a wonderful job. I just finished a book that's considered to be a satire, and it's called Black Buck. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this book before.
I've heard, yes.
But I read it in about 2 or 3 days. So very interesting, kind of about startups and the culture inside of startups and how those can be influenced and shifted. And I also just finished listening to a book called Minor Feelings. It's by an Asian writer, and she writes about her experiences and what it's like. She's a poet as well. So just 2 very interesting books that I just wrapped up, and one that I'm about to start reading. So there you go. Thank you for that question. That's a good one.
You're very, very welcome. Well, it looks like we're getting close to our time here. But real quick before we leave, what is one thing we can do tomorrow morning? We get up tomorrow, one call to action that we can do immediately to start us helping bridge this literacy gap?
Well, I think that we all have a sphere of influence, and we all have children inside of that sphere of influence. I would ask you to reach out to those kids and make sure that they have enough books. And then I would ask you to step outside of that comfort zone, maybe find a school in your neighborhood, in your community, and see if you can volunteer. See if you can connect with a kid in that school whose fire may not have been ignited yet, and just go and sit and listen first to what it is that they love, and then go out and find the books that you think would be a love connection for that particular child. That's what we could do tomorrow. Maybe you can't go to the school tomorrow, but you can find the phone number in the morning.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Bailey, for this wonderful talk this evening. Don't forget that you can find the link for freedomreaders.org over in the chat, and also the link to order a copy of Forever Free from Brave and Kind Books here in Decatur, Georgia, or order it from whatever local independent bookstore is around you. Don't forget to, of course, patronize those Black-owned independent bookstores and businesses, because we are aiming to build a just and diverse society. And don't forget that not only do Black voices matter, but Black lives matter. We thank you all so much for allowing us into your homes this evening, and we hope to see you again very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yeah.